when you decide to become a writer, you're signing up essentially for a life of mostly rejection, right? Like for every yes you get, there's, maybe 200 no's leading up to it, So you have to be really stubborn. You have to really want it. And it has to be something that you would do anyway, even if you were never going to get paid.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Mostly Harmless. I'm your host, Damn It Damien. Buddies, we're sitting down, we're chatting with my new best friend forever, Mr. Shaun Hamill. He is the writer of A Cosmology of Monsters, which came out in 2019 on Pantheon Press. Pantheon Press is a subsidiary of Penguin Random House, so this is a big deal. You could find this book in the bookstores around Halloween in its paperback version. It's got a really great quote from Stephen King about how this is a very John Irving-esque horror novel, and I will tell you, it's one of the best debut novels I've read in a very long time, and one of the best novels I've read in a long time. It's really re-kickstarted my love of reading. It's not a traditional horror novel in that it's more of like, Shaun says it himself, it's more of an emo book. But it's about the monsters inside of us and our own battles, as well as the monsters outside of us too. It's a fun, cool book, and I really can't wait to see the success of what happens. I like this book so much, I've gifted it to 3 different friends of mine. I've loaned this copy out 2 or 3 times. And you know what, buddies? If you're interested in reading this book, I'm such a big fan of it. The first 2 people that write me at Damien, Damian, at mostlyharmlesspodcast.com and just say, gimme, or whatever, I'm gonna mail you a copy of this book from bookshops.org. That's how much I like this book. That's how much I want other people to read it and like it. We even talked to Shaun about starting a book club. If you're at all interested in joining our little book club event, please let us know. Damien at mostlyharmlesspodcast.com. Comment below in the YouTubes. Speaking of YouTube, easiest way to support this silly little channel is just click that little button that should be right around here saying subscribe to Mostly Harmless Podcast. As soon as we get up to enough viewers, we can make a little bit of money on this thing. So, and if you want to just directly send some money, we're on Patreon at patreon.com/mostlyharmlesspodcast. We're also on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast from. Buddies, I've rambled on way long enough. We're going to have a great chat today with Mr. Shaun Hamill. I can't wait. So let's just get right into it right now. How are you?
Not bad. I hope you don't mind my fake background. It's just my office. It looks like nothing. So.
Yeah. Is that Doom or Wolfenstein behind you?
That is Doom. Those are the flaming skulls. Yeah. It's the only background I've got that actually kind of reads with me in the middles. You can actually see stuff. Like I've tried putting the cover of Cosmology back there, but it doesn't look like anything. So
hey, we're hanging out today. We're talking to Shaun Hamill, the writer of Cosmology of Monsters. Hooray! Fake clapping or whatever. I don't know what to do. Shaun, how the hell are you on this fine Monday afternoon?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Finding this book, or when this book found me, I was like, man, I really want to talk to Shaun. I really want to meet this guy. I really want to be friends with him. You're from Arlington. I was originally born in Dallas, and I'm like, how old are you?
I'm 37.
37, I'm 39, so we're roughly the same age. Like, who knows? Maybe if I had never left Texas, we might have been like friends. Who knows? So I was like, man, I want to meet this Shaun guy. I want to talk to him. Well, the only way I can do that right now is during the pandemic. Well, maybe I should start the podcast back up. And you've been on this list of people I wanted to talk to. So I was like, do we wait till your new book comes out, or do we just do it now and try to sell this now while people are still sitting at home? So
yeah, because the book that I'm writing, it's better we're doing it now because just to give you an idea of what the timeline was like, I know it's different with different writers, different editors, but I sold Cosmology in November of 2017 and it didn't come out until September of 2019. So even if I sell a book this year, there's a chance you might not see it till 2023. So I'm glad we're doing this now instead of waiting another 2 years.
Yeah, man. Well, then I can just get those cool points and be like, I knew it was going to be great then, or, whatever, I was there first. So what else did we, what's that?
Oh, go ahead.
No.
Thank you for being on the ground floor.
Yeah. One of my very, very best friends lived in New York City. We don't text very often. And then just one day out of the blue, she texted me and she's like, Damien, I just finished this book. I absolutely adored it. You're the first person I'm telling, like, you have to read this book. And it's funny because I was just finishing reading The World According to Garp, by John Irving. And so
Nice.
on the very front of the cover is a quote: "If John Irving ever wrote a horror novel, it would be something like this. I loved it," by one of my favorite writers, Stephen King. And then kind of an acquaintance of mine for NPR, Jason Heller, wrote a fantastic review of the book, and I bought it, and then I read it in like 3 days.
Yeah, that review was yeah. Tell Jason thank you. I've told him, but next time you talk to him, say thank you. I actually have a sort of a funny story about this. So, are you familiar with kratom? Do you know what that is?
I do not know.
Sort of, it's legal in some states. It's, you know how there's CBD and stuff now.
Right.
Well, this kratom stuff is basically supposed to be kind of like weed. It's not legal everywhere. Like you can get it in pill form or in edibles or whatever. My wife and I had gotten some of it in Georgia, and I'd found that it was useful for whenever I was feeling anxious. So I had to fly. This was the first time I was flying anywhere for the book tour. So we were flying to Salt Lake City. I decided to take some of this stuff because I was nervous about flying and about the event and all of it on an empty stomach, got on the plane. Sleep. When I woke up, I was being sick. Like I didn't come all the way awake until I was just vomiting everywhere. And like they had to refund the tickets of the people sitting in the row in front of me. And I had to change clothes. Thank God we packed changes of clothes in our carry-on. My wife is just trying to, clean me up. She was a real superhero that day. And then when we landed though, that NPR, review had just gone up. So it was like this wonderful, like, okay, all isn't lost. My career isn't over just because I threw up on an airplane and couldn't get to the sick bag in time. But don't take kratom and get on a plane or eat something first.
Oh my God. How long a flight was that?
It was the first of two, like, because I've lived in the Birmingham area, almost nothing is a direct flight. I have to connect somewhere. So I think we connected somewhere like, I don't even remember, maybe like Colorado or something. So it was on the first leg from Birmingham. And I didn't put two and two together about the kratom. I thought it was motion sickness. So I'm like stopping in the store and buying all this Dramamine. And, it's not until later on in the day, I'm like, well, hang on.
Yeah, that sounds like the first time I ever ate an edible. I was like, for the first couple of hours, I was like, I don't feel anything. You eat a couple more, and the next thing you know, it's like a couple of days later, and you're like, where am I? Where have I been? I don't know if you experienced
that. Yeah. Actually, the first time I did edibles, we baked cookies at a friend's house. My wife was the baker. She was kind of the one who knew how to do everything. When they were done, she gave us all a cookie and I ate it. And like 15 minutes later, I wasn't feeling anything. So I ate a second one and then got like profoundly fucked up for like the rest of the day. I couldn't move. I couldn't keep my eyes open. Like that joke about it hitting you like a ton of bricks. That was me. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been very careful with edibles since then.
Yeah, very. Man. And then days later, it's like, I got this weird flu. And then it's like, wait, no. Candy, gummy bear, sleep 2 days. Oh, that wasn't the flu. Yeah, there it goes.
A weed hangover, yeah.
Yeah. Ooh, I might be on a little one of those today. But I really want to know who the hell is Shaun Hamill. And I wanted to know, starting with, like, when I was a little kid, I really, really wanted to be a writer. I did not necessarily follow those dreams, but did you want to be a writer when you were growing up?
I always wanted to be creative. I remember from a very early age, I wanted to make stuff and I loved stories or behind the scenes. Anytime HBO did one of those behind the scenes, like first look things, like I remember being really fascinated with those from an early age. At first I thought I wanted to be a comic book artist because that, I loved comic books, and it was the 90s, early 90s. So like comic book artists were like millionaires at this point, like Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee. But in fourth grade, I don't know if they did this at your school or not. Did they do something called Young Authors Day?
I don't know about that. I grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, not too terribly far from Dallas or Birmingham where you're at now. And in my fourth grade class too, like we would have this hands-on teacher that we would write books and the rest of the class would check them out. And I wrote a series of Bartman books like that were like
Nice.
the most popular. So I think if it's something similar to that.
Yeah. Every kid is given the opportunity. They give you like a little blank storybook essentially, and you could, write and draw. And so I wrote and drew my story. I think it was sort of a ripoff of Days of Future Past and Star Wars, just kind of mashed up together. Everybody in my class really liked the story, but the one thing I noticed, like even at age 10, was everybody else's drawings looked so much better than mine,
Yeah.
but they all loved the story. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I think I found my lane. And that's taken different shapes over the years. Like for a long time, I wanted to be a screenwriter. Then at one point I wanted to be a full-on like auteur director, writer director. But what I found out in the few shorts that I've made, which, I think they're all on IMDb. So if you want to see me embarrass myself, there's a real easy way to do it.
Okay. I actually would like that.
Well, yeah, then just put my name in on IMDb. You can see stuff that I was in and then stuff that I made. But what I figured out making movies was that I really didn't like, it's not that I dislike people. I love people, but I don't know. I had friends who were filmmakers, and I would watch the way they would interact with actors and like what an open, organic, emotional process that could be when it was going well. And that's just not me. I'm kind of what I liked was writing the story. I loved editing too, but like actually being in the room, especially for like emotionally tough scenes where people are fighting or yelling, like it just sort of triggers something in my like little PTSD, my parents are fighting brain. And I'm just like, I can't be in the room with it. So, and I was lucky enough to have a really good fiction teacher at the University of Texas at Arlington, who she came out of Michigan's MFA program, which is, one of the top programs in the country. And she won a Hopwood and all this stuff. And she kind of was the first person to really take me seriously, and started, giving me like David Foster Wallace or Laurie Moore, or all these, literary writers. She was like, you're a good writer, but, all these twist endings, like, it doesn't work for M. Night Shyamalan anymore, and it sure as shit isn't working for you. And she really took me seriously and sort of mentored me. And that's kind of where I figured out, like, okay, yeah, fiction is where it at. This is my home base,
Yeah, that's real cool that you got to narrow it down. I too was somebody like at one point I was like, I'm gonna go to film school and then I'm gonna do this. I was gonna be a journalist. The punk rock kid in me got in the way, and I was like, well, I don't need to go to school for this. I'm just gonna go do it. Some days I wish I had the schooling for some of this weird stuff that I'm doing now, but I don't. Do you feel like school helped you succeed in following these paths, or do you think you'd be doing this without school?
I mean, I was doing it anyway. But I definitely think that school opened some doors for me that wouldn't have normally been open, to guys like you and me, just coming from DFW or just growing up and not being already somehow sort of connected to something in the industry. I applied to MFA programs right out of college, and I didn't get in anywhere in like 2008. And then I met, she was my girlfriend, but then became my wife. I met her and she was finishing school. So I stayed. It took her a few years. And in that time, what I did was, I published my first story. That teacher brought me on to the reading committee for this prize that the University of North Texas gives out. It's the Catherine Ann Porter Prize for Fiction. And they publish a book of short stories every year from the winning writer, and they actually get a book contract and they're paid and everything. And so basically for 4 years, I was sort of in between, and I wrote a novel and I published a story, and I kept in touch with that teacher kind of in the back of my head, like, okay, I'm gonna try this again, maybe when my wife finishes school. And I managed to find an agent for that first novel I wrote, but the novel never sold, and then she left the business. But then I got into the Iowa Writers Workshop, and I don't think I would have gotten in there without all that other stuff. Kind of, when you're reading the slush pile, I think that might be the most valuable, like, writing education you can actually get, even more than what you learn in a classroom, because when you have to read hundreds of stories by strangers in the course of months, you start to notice real quick what everybody's doing, what's interesting, what bores you, because you're looking for, and you start to realize that editors, they're looking for any excuse to put your work down, because there's always more good work than there are places to publish something. So if you give them an excuse, they're going to put it down and move on. So you have to basically convince them to hang on, seduce them, essentially. All of that I learned because of this undergrad mentor who kept bringing me into things even after I graduated. She kept, inviting me to things. She would take me to parties and introduce me to visiting writers at the University of North Texas, things like that. So, and then of course, getting into the Iowa, I think the Iowa pedigree is why my book came out from, one of the big 5 publishers and not, more of like a smaller indie press. That's kind of where I originally thought it would end up. But I think that Iowa, that carries a certain prestige with it, that immediately makes an agent put you at the top of the pile to at least look at. And same with an editor. If the work's not there and they don't like it, that's not, but it gets you through the door. So I guess that's a long way of saying, if in both terms of education and networking, it was hugely influential. The other thing I noticed in Iowa was most people weren't like me in terms of their backgrounds. Like, I was there in my early 30s, and most of the people there were like in their early to mid 20s, and they've just graduated from places like Harvard or Brown University or whatever. And I'm this kid from Arlington, Texas, who's, grown man with these children, these from pretty affluent backgrounds. And you really start to see like just how big a gap there is between people, in the lower to lower middle class in terms of the opportunity available, and then like the people who are most likely to get published and everything. So like, I'm incredibly lucky to have kind of jumped through these hoops to end up where I ended up. But I also realized some of that is just chance, some's talent, but a lot of it's chance.
Yeah. One thing that just popped in my head is it's like you're talking about, you worked with all these people, you're reading things, you're putting things down. Can writing be taught to people, or do some people just, you have to have that thing inside of you, if that makes sense?
It makes perfect sense. Is it something that you're born with, or is it something that can be nurtured? I think there is such a thing as natural talent, but I also think that talent is a lot more common than most people give credit for. I think what's rarer is that work ethic that will push you through, because when you decide to become a writer, you're signing up essentially for a life of mostly rejection, right? Like, for every yes you get, there's, maybe 200 no's leading up to it, So you have to be really stubborn. You have to really want it. And it has to be something that you would do anyway, even if you were never going to get paid. And I think that was kind of what kept me in it, was like, even in those years between college and grad school, was just this, I couldn't stop doing it. It was like, this is what I do. This is how I define myself, not my 8 to 5, whatever, it's this is always how I've defined myself. I don't know that really answers the question. I think John Gardner, in one of his books, he wrote The Art of Fiction and Grindel, talks about how he believes it's more of like a combination of interest and dedication. Like, if you're not interested in it, why would you get good at it, right? Like, and it's possible to be interested and try really hard and not be good at it. I've met writers like that who worked hard, but like their stuff just never made that jump. But usually they ended up finding something that they were better at and kind of going on with that. And so, John Gardner said more people fail at being businessmen than fail at being novelists, So like, if you're, stubborn enough, I think you can get there,
Yeah. And I listen to a lot of those comedy podcasts, Mark Maron or any of those guys interviewing Conan. And it's less like, well, that guy was talented, that guy was talented, that guy was talented, but that guy just wanted it more. And I think that's got to be part of it. Like I got laid off earlier this year, and I started just sitting down every single day and trying to hammer out 1,500 words, not a lot. And just some days it's just like, I don't know what to write for 1,500 words. But some days themes and things start popping up and out of nowhere. And I'm like, weird themes that I would never have anticipated or popping out of my own work. What is your style of writing? How do you sit down and craft something?
Well, it seems to be evolving. I used to be a lot more precious about it, and sort of superstitious. Like I had certain rituals, and I had to feel a certain way about an idea to really, get it to the finish line. That's kind of what took me so long after Cosmology, because I poured everything I had at that time into that book, so that when I sold it, not only do I have that fear of success, right? Like, because I've sold it but I don't have another book written yet. So like now it becomes like, okay, well, what do I do next? Does it have to be another horror novel? Does it have to be like this? Does it, am I already in a pigeonhole? Like, somebody tell me what to do. So I've got that. But then there's also like, I didn't trust myself enough to follow any of the ideas I did have.
Sure.
And I kept trying to check in with other people and get basically what I wanted was somebody to tell me, if you write this book, we will buy it, and what I kept, and, maybe 10 books down the line, we'll get there. But like with just one book under my belt, like that's not really how it was going to work, especially, since it didn't, blow up like, say, the Night Circus or something and become, an international phenomenon. So what I've started doing is treating it more like work. I mean, I've always worked at it, but I guess like understanding that my attention, I think Matt Bell, who's a very gifted writer and a good teacher, he's on Twitter, talked about how basically his attention produces more good work in the long run than his good feelings or bad feelings on any given day. And I think I let the bad feelings really fuck with me for a long time. And part of it was I needed to go to therapy. And part of it was I wasn't properly medicated for my own like intense anxiety issues. And so in the last couple of years, I've made a lot of progress. And now I'm at a point where like, I was terrified, of course, that old cliche about if you get medicated or treated, you're going to kill the spark in you. And maybe for some people that's true, but I think for me, it's been very freeing because I'm not, that self-loathing would slow me down. There would be days where I could not make myself write when I was working on Cosmology because what I was writing just wasn't good enough for me. And now this new book, which I started about a year ago, basically when quarantine started. So like in March, I just sat down and wrote it. I decided I'd written 2 outlines and sent them both to my agent. My agent sent them to the editor of Cosmology and said, like, either of these sound good? And he was like, I kind of like this one. So I just sat down and started writing. And what I found was that it sort of, it grew as I wrote it and became more interesting and took on life. And that's what I wasn't giving any of those other ideas a chance to do. I wasn't giving them my full attention. I was sort of trying to rush to the next thing just so I'd know there was a next thing.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying, I don't, so it used to be something where I would, sit down at a certain time of day, and I always did it with yellow legal pads and, a certain type of pen. And, now it's a lot looser and more just like, I mean, I'm still pretty much on the I need to write every day train, at least when I'm working on something, but I don't think there will be as big a gap between this book and the next one because like I've already got things percolating and I'm not shitting all over myself inside all the time. So it makes it a lot easier to kind of sort through, oh, well, that's kind of interesting, or maybe not, you know? So I guess I took a lot of the anxiety out of the process, and what's left is the stuff that I'm interested in, that I enjoy. I mean, there's still days when I'm frustrated and I feel like it's no good, but like I can talk myself into like, that's just how it feels today. Tomorrow is going to feel different, maybe, you know. Does that make sense?
No, it's totally great. And what I love about this is like I have creative friends. I actually have some writing friends, but I really don't have anybody. Like, I talked to my girlfriend about all the same stuff that you're telling me about, and I'm sure she's just like, okay, cool, yeah, yeah. So it is cool to like talk to somebody who you're actively going through it, and you're not in too far a place from where I am in my stuff. So it's just cool to talk to other people about like this creative journey and process. So no, man, I get it.
Can I to double back to something you said earlier,
Yeah.
that John Irving thing and the Stephen King quote? I didn't coach him. We didn't coach him on that at all, but like it was exactly what I was going for from the very beginning of writing that book. So like the fact that like my hero recognized me emulating my other hero, and like put it right on the cover of the book for me was just like, mwah, you
Yeah.
know?
And I'm gonna like this summer I read Stephen King's On Writing, which I think changed my way of even consuming any other kind of media. Are you like that too? Can you watch a movie without dissecting how it works, or can you just turn off your brain and enjoy something?
I definitely can't turn off my brain. Um, there is a part of me that's kind of like ticking things off in terms of, especially if it's something I was really excited about. Like
Yeah.
I remember when the new Star Wars movie started coming out. You know, I that hypercritical part of my brain kicks in and is like, well, why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? Why'd you
Right.
do that? You know, and eventually, like after seeing it a couple of times, you kind of come to terms with what it is, and then you decide whether you actually like the movie or not, instead of this movie you built in your head, you know, or how you would have done it. But so I think if I'm enjoying something, if something, to use this word again, seduces me, like last night I watched Inland Empire for the first time, that David
Okay.
Lynch movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen that one.
It's well, if you like David Lynch, it's worth checking out. If you don't like David Lynch, this isn't going to change your mind. Let me put it that way. It's maybe the most David Lynch thing ever. But what interested me about it was, despite the way it was shot, because it looks like it was shot on about the same grade stuff I shot my last short film on, like very low budget consumer grade cameras. So it looks cheap, despite the fact that it's got like Laura Dern and Jeremy Irons and Justin Theroux in it, you know, was that somehow still like it drew me in and kept my attention for 3 solid hours, which is no mean feat. I only meant to watch like the first hour of it and then go do something else. And instead I just sat there and could not take my eyes off it. So when something grabs me, I get completely sucked in and sort of surrender to it. But I think that a lot of creative people, a lot of writers have a higher, you know, there's something I read, I think it was in a Sid Field book about screenwriting, talking about how even if you pay to see a movie or to read a book, there's still an initial resistance. There's a pull when you start watching or reading. And the movie's job is to basically, whether it's a romantic comedy, sci-fi, horror, whatever, is to sort of, you know, create suspension of disbelief, so that suddenly your brain is tricked into experiencing this as something real, you know. And I think creative people maybe have a higher threshold for that, because we're keen, you know, we're wise on some of the tricks, the things that, you know, the tropes, and you know, it's a little bit harder to get us on board with something. Or, you know, I also find myself deliberately saying shut up to myself sometimes, just, you know, like, you're being way too hard, like just enjoy this, you know, if it's good, like, you know, yes, there are things to nitpick, but I'm enjoying this. So do you find that, do you have a higher resistance now as you get
You know,
deeper into writing?
So now that I'm writing more, I understand, like, sometimes I can just tell it's like, oh, this scene happens to make something else later in the movie make sense. Or sometimes, like, when I'm watching a movie, I'll be like, uh, Arrival is a movie I was watching just very recently. I read the short story it was based on again, rewatched the movie, and there's this like subplot of these hillbilly, National Guard people that try to take over the test site because they think the aliens are bad, and it's not in the book. And you can tell at the beats of the movie it's at that it was put in there just so there'd be like a little more drama, and it wasn't really needed, but it's something that somebody, you could just feel it when watching it, that somebody on a committee somewhere was like, we need more drama here, how about this? I don't know, and maybe I'm making that up, but that's where
No,
my
no,
head starts to go now.
I think that, yeah, you start to see what's intrinsic to the story and what feels tacked on, what actually feels like it's of a piece. So I definitely agree with that. And I feel like that's also something that I have to be wary of in my own work, is sort of like putting something in just because it feels like, well, something needs to happen here, instead of just being like, well, no, that's not the story, and working through that much harder problem of, okay, why does it feel wrong, instead of just put a fight here, or, have the
Yeah.
National Guard take over. And I think really good stories and films, for me at least, are ones that I end up getting so sucked in that I can be surprised. I want to be made gullible again, essentially, so that,
Yeah.
to forget, oh, I can see them setting this up for later or whatever, to like be so caught up in the moment that whenever the surprise or the reveal or the climax happens, it feels, that phrase that you hear over and over again, surprising but inevitable.
Yeah.
And I think it's harder to get that, first of all, the more you watch, right?
Right.
Or read, but also the more that you learn about how stories are told and function, because they are engines, essentially. They're
Yeah.
mechanic.
I have a hard time with, like, I get a lot of crap because I really don't think that Christopher Nolan. I just this weekend watched Dark Knight Rises again. I don't think he's a good storyteller. I think he makes awesome cinematic huge rides, but the end I'm like, well, why? Like, there's no, like, he doesn't follow any rules, which some people like the Coens I think can get away with. But I think Chris Nolan keeps his, I don't know, it's just hard because watching Dark Knight Rises, I was like, why did this need to happen? Why is this in the story? Why is this here? So I have a hard time shutting my brain off with that, and then my friends are like, just shut up and enjoy it, and I'm like,
Well, I
I'm
mean, Dark Knight
trying.
Rises isn't his best movie either, to be
Yeah.
fair. I think that one definitely feels like I feel like there was probably like the death of Heath Ledger probably threw a big wrench into whatever
Right.
his big plan was, and they kind of had to scramble. Um, and the movie feels rushed, kind of like Rise of Skywalker feels rushed
Yeah.
too. Like, feels like they if they'd taken 6 more months, there would have been a much better movie,
Yeah.
And but that's interesting about Christopher Nolan. So do you feel like he relies on tricks and bombast instead of like narrative?
I think what Chris Nolan does is he's like, you know what, I have this cool idea for a scene, and then I have this other cool idea for a scene, and another cool idea for a scene. Let's make a movie that ties all those together. But I could be wrong. That's just my own personal like takeaway, and I've been called an idiot
I
for
don't
those
think you're an
views.
idiot. I think even for as popular a filmmaker as he is, he's also very divisive.
Yeah,
I haven't seen his last two movies, Dunkirk or Tenet.
I
But
didn't watch Dunkirk. Tenet was fine.
I, it's been a while since I've seen him, but I feel like his early stuff, like Memento and the remake of Insomnia, are very solidly told stories. Although Memento does rely on the gimmick of being told backwards, but I, I don't know, maybe as his budgets have gotten bigger, maybe there's more pressure to build a spectacle instead of just telling a story.
Yeah,
I haven't seen it in a while, but I remember liking Inception quite a bit, and even giving Interstellar a pass, but that might be mostly because of the that amazing Hans Zimmer score.
Oh man, it's so good. I got it on vinyl over there. Woo.
I listened to it while I was writing Cosmology constantly. It's
Nice.
so good.
Which is a good point. I think we're drifting too far away because like I bought and given away 3 copies of this book. I've loaned this copy out many times. I really like it. We probably should have did this in the beginning, but what's your elevator pitch? What is Cosmology about for those people out there who don't know?
A Cosmology of Monsters is a family saga / coming of age novel about a family running a haunted house that takes place over the course of 50 years. And it's narrated by the youngest child of the family, Noah, starting before his birth and then going up through his 30s. And it's about basically the haunted house that they run and the very real, but also figurative monsters that are haunting them and sort of tormenting them, all through the filter of this little boy kind of growing up and learning more about his family's history and these strange creatures.
Yeah.
Does that,
no, that's perfect. It's not a jump scare book. It's a very dark, gothic, romantic-y, what the fuck is going on here kind of book. But it does have, I don't know. I grew up as a very sad kid, and I just got the character. The character got me. Other people, my friend Kamiko was like, "You remind me so much of this book." So it just
I was definitely emo before emo, right?
right.
I mean, I think emo was starting to come to prominence right as I turned 18, so I wasn't too far off. But yeah, it's definitely sort of a depressive kid dealing with a family that's been sort of permanently wounded, and it's interesting that he's the one narrating, because for most of the story he's the one with the least information,
right. Well, and that's what I like about it too, is we're on the ride with the main character on this journey, self-discovery of self-discovery.
Yeah, it really is. And in its own way, I think the ending is actually sort of a happy ending in a dark gothic kind of way.
Yeah, agreed.
And it's interesting when people ask me about, and it doesn't happen all the time, but I forget if you and I talked about this on Twitter or not, about
maybe
sequels or whatever, that I've gotten messages from people on Goodreads who are sort of, one person in particular seemed really mad about the end of the book, and insisting like that's not where the story ends. And I'm like, well, I mean, I've got an idea for how to keep it going, but I'm also very happy with where it ends. I think it sort of thematically comes full circle right then.
Yeah, how have the reviews been? Because I glanced at Goodreads, and this is another book that seems to be very like, some people love it, some people are like, well, what is this? But there's one in particular that I'm not going to even requote, that I'm like, did you even read the same book I read, man? What is it like for you to get these such wild variations?
In the early days of the book's release, I kept up with it pretty religiously, and now I don't really go, if I've got it set up so that if somebody sends me a message or something, I'll get an email to my personal email, and then I can go look at it. But I mostly use it just to log my own reading, and I try not to look at my own profile, because for a while, like, I was living or dying every time the score went up by or down by 1/10 of a point. And last I looked, and it had settled in a place basically that I could live with. I won't say what the number is in case it's changed, because I don't want.
Right.
But basically, I feel like the important thing I knew going in that this was a weird book, and of course, as an artist, you want everybody to love your work. But if everybody loved it, then I probably hadn't done my job right, because Noah makes some bad choices. And it's also a weird book. I remember standing in the driveway with my wife the weekend we sent it out to editors. My agent and I sent it for the first round of submissions. I remember just saying to her, this book is never going to sell. It's not literary enough for the literary crowd. It's not horror enough for the horror crowd. Because I didn't think it was a particularly scary book. I thought it had some scary implications, but I saw it as more of like a moody book, more dread and dark fantasy than horror.
Yeah, it's more about using monsters as a metaphor and exploring humanity by, just what they did with Frankenstein, like exploring humanity through monsters.
Right, exactly. And so I was delighted that it sold, but it's still, it definitely stung when people would dismiss it or whatever, but also it's part of the process, and it sucks. Like the first professional review for the book that came out just fucking trashed it. It was abysmal. And it was in one of the industry trades, and I was just like, oh shit. But then I got reviews like Jason Heller's, where so you start to see like, okay, you if you're lucky, you can kind of come to peace with like the work that you did, and knowing that work isn't for everybody, but it's really for the people it's for.
Yeah.
And the people this book is really for really seem to respond to it. And that means more to me than like, well, everybody read it, like the Da Vinci Code or whatever, but nobody really remembers the Da Vinci Code, hopefully this is a story that'll hang with its target audience, for a little while. Maybe they'll remember it in a few years. It's only been like 18 months since the book first came out, so I don't really know what kind of legs it'll have. But the fact that we're still talking about it in 2021 is a good sign, I think.
Yeah. No, I loved it. And it really, I had a hard time reading The World According to Garp, which is, which was what I read right before I read Cosmology. And I just got really bored in the middle of it. And then I figured out, I was like, oh, I'm supposed to be bored because the Robin Williams character,
Garp is bored. Yeah.
Yeah, Garp is bored. And I'm like, oh, that was kind of cool. But when I finished this book, I was like, I can't wait to read the next book. And then I ended up reading like 25-ish books, like really quickly in a row. And you helped to reignite that love with this book.
Oh, thank you.
And because of this, like I started Googling and I'm like, what else is similar to this? I ended up reading The Twisted Ones by Kingfisher, aka Ursula Vernon. But it, we'll talk about that in a minute. But what I really want to know is, so I had this idea when I was a kid. I was the oldest of 4 kids, 6-person house, and we were lower income. But I had this idea that if I could just write a book and get it out there and sell it to a publisher, all my answers would be solved. Now you've got a book, it's out there, you can pick it up at Target, you've got Stephen King's name on the front of it. Did it solve all your problems?
No. No. It did not. I was living with my in-laws in the months leading up to us selling it, because my job at the University of Iowa had ended and they hadn't extended me more hours, and my wife had been let go from her job. And I still wasn't really making enough with medical stuff and working a full-time day job to support us both outside the house, even with that. But even taking aside the material considerations, this is something I've been through twice now. I've been lucky enough to go through it twice. The first time was whenever I got into Iowa, and the second time was selling this book, which is that no matter what you achieve, you're still you. And so if you can't live with you successful you isn't going to be that much. He might be more comfortable, or she might be more comfortable, but she's not necessarily going to be happier, or he, because it doesn't solve your problems. I mean, even if I became a millionaire, I'd still be the kid, who with the anxiety problems and the shyness and the need for external validation and all this stuff. And that's kind of the epiphany is like, that's never going away. It doesn't matter what I do. So better to learn how to live with it and manage it, and understand that there will always be problems and sort of come to peace with that, if that makes sense.
No. That's totally what I'm dealing with right now in my life. So again, thank you so much for, I don't really, it's quarantine. We're in a pandemic. I talked to my girlfriend about this stuff, but it's really interesting because I don't really have anybody out there. Just thank you. Like, I feel like I'm in a therapy session today,
No, it's
talking with you. It's really, but it's helping me. I'm getting something from this too, other than just, friendship and a wonderful book out of it.
Thank you. And I should mention, I'm no longer living with my in-laws. I did go through a divorce. It didn't solve all the problems. Like, there were problems there before, and the book was a fun distraction, and it made life really interesting. And I'm so glad that it happened the way it did. And I got to travel and I'd never been to New York before. I got to go to New York Comic-Con. I met Stephen Graham Jones. We were on a panel together, I got to walk in Central Park. Like, all these great things happened, but it didn't solve, it wasn't the key that solved everything, but it's opened other doors. And, like, I get to talk to cool people like you, who I wouldn't have met otherwise,
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And you still have a day job too, right? Don't you?
Yeah. I'm a technical writer. Yeah.
Like,
that makes industrial pipe fittings. Yeah.
Oh man. So, even though I actually never saw this in my Target, but even though your book's in Target, even though, you're still going to work 9 to 5 every Monday through Friday. That's
well,
crazy.
The thing is, with a book advance, unless you're getting something that's like giant, like even a sizable book advance, you have to consider most of those are paid out in 4 installments these days. So you get a quarter of it on signing, you get a quarter of it when the book is finally accepted by the publisher, the draft that's going to be printed, you get another whenever it comes out, and you get your 4th payment when 12 months later, or at least that's how it worked for me. So if you actually divide that up, what you end up with is not quite, unless you've got a really big advance, but even if you got like a low 6-figure advance, what you're looking at isn't quite a living salary, especially when you take into account that it doesn't come with health insurance. It doesn't come with, so the extra money is nice, and it definitely helped because, that came from the book, and that still continues to come in from like foreign sales and stuff. But it did solve some financial problems, especially, from grad school, like just leftover debts and stuff. But it didn't make it so I don't have to do a job anymore, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does.
And it could still happen, if, I came pretty close. There was the book got optioned for TV, and if that had actually gone to series, then that once you've got the TV money rolling in, then you can pretty much quit your job, because it's an insane amount of money that you make just for having written the book that it's based on, even if they don't use you in any capacity to work on it. And we came pretty close, but no cigar. And it's too bad, because it was a really cool, I really liked the director. I really liked the script. The producer was really cool.
You don't have to say any words, but does the potential director follow you on Twitter and make things I really like?
I don't believe that director is on Twitter.
Oh, there's a director following you on Twitter that I'm like, are they gonna do something together?
That's my other, like, I'm kind of hoping.
Yeah. We won't talk about it, because I don't want to ruin anything. But
yeah,
I saw that.
I mean, I haven't heard anything, but like that is cool. My dream, actually, is I hadn't actually caught up with that filmmaker's work, just because when a lot of his stuff was coming out was when I was doing cosmology. So like I didn't really start catching up until after the book came out, and I was just like, oh my God, where's this guy been all my life? So I would love to get to work with that person without getting any deeper into it.
Yeah, no. I'm gonna just shut up because having loved your book as much, and I don't even know if I think we're on the same page. But man, if that director can get his hands on, I can see something very beautiful happening.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I think it would be the perfect mesh of material and filmmaker. Like
yeah,
I know I'm biased, but like watching something else of his that a lot of people have watched, I was like, holy shit, this is like my book. Like in terms of tone, the way it balanced genre and human, feeling,
yeah.
and family in particular.
and
Uh,
and you know what? I don't want to even say
all
anymore.
right, we'll back off of it. I'm
No,
sorry.
but that's cool that we're on the same page. I know we're on the same page.
Yes.
Man, I thank you. Like for my first experiment of hanging out on the couch, doing a chat interview, drinking some beers. This has been wonderful. Like I'm just so happy because, and again, I don't really get to talk to people much about my more creative side of these endeavors. So, and again, like I'm so convinced that we'd probably have been friends had we met in Dallas or whatever on the road. But at least now we have the internet.
Yeah, we've got Zoom. We
Are
can still
are
hang
you
out.
still in Arkansas?
I'm in the Birmingham area in Alabama.
That's right. That's right. I'm sorry.
Possibly working on a return to Texas if I can get a transfer. Maybe once COVID has died down, because DFW is kind of a hotbed right now.
Yeah.
Where I forget, where are you?
I'm in Denver these days. Yeah.
Okay.
But I was born in Dallas. I grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana. My mother is finally leaving Shreveport for Waxahachie, Texas. My grandfather's right out there in Ennis, Texas. So like all my main family is in Texas. So I'm like, maybe if you end up in Texas again someday, we'll meet up.
Well, if book tours are still a thing after
Yeah.
COVID, and if I get to go on tour for this, I've got some other friends in Colorado. So
Oh.
the trick about, and I'll put this out there for anybody who's interested in getting not just me but any author to come to their store, is to basically get friendly with your local indie and let them know that you'd be interested in having that writer, especially if it's somebody who's regional and can just make a drive, doesn't have to fly. Because where I went on tour for Cosmology was based pretty much entirely on who invited me. I mean, we sent out, press packets and stuff. And then the people who responded like, yeah, we'd love to have him, or those are the places I went. So I would love to come to Colorado for a visit. Hint, hint, if anybody out there in Colorado has a
Yeah.
favorite indie store.
So I was also curious. So like I've got Joe Hill's collection of books right back here. He's got a ton of short fiction out there. So when he came out with his first novel, Heart Shaped Box, he already had a bunch of fiction published. Where is your stuff? Where can I find more Shaun Hamill books to read?
I only have 3 short stories published. I wrote a novel that didn't sell, and my current agent, it was written in a style that's kind of gone out of fashion in the last 10 years, and understandably so, but I spent 4 years on that. And then Cosmology, I started in 2014 and we sold in 2017. So that's 3 years, and that's what I was working on. These books until now have been kind of a huge undertaking. And because I was so precious about the process, like I feel like it slowed me down, and I robbed myself of maybe opportunities to play like Joe Hill does, in his wonderful short fiction, and his novels too. But I know the novels take him longer than they take his dad, which makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
Because he's not publishing a novel every, 12 months or whatever. My first story, Unpracticed Altitudes, is pretty easy to find. It was published by Carve in 2010. My second one, We're All Fine Here Now, was published by a journal that's defunct, but I think it was called Spilt Infinitive, but I think the issue is still technically available on Kindle. It might even be on Kindle Unlimited. If not, it's like a buck, or, if you don't want the buck, I don't think anybody, give me any grief if I just emailed it to you. And then this last fall, actually, I was lucky enough to have a story in Tor. They've got their new horror imprint, Nightfire, And they've been doing the last 2 Halloweens, they've done an audio anthology of short stories called Come Join Us by the Fire. And this was the first short story I'd published in like 7 years. My story, Music of the Abyss, which is kind of the last of my Lovecraft riffing, was part of that anthology. And it's going to be an ebook, but you can listen to it for free on Google Play. And I think in February, it'll probably be on some of the other platforms like Spotify, but you can pull it up in your web browser. It's like maybe 20 minutes to listen to. So that's pretty much it for my output. I'm working really hard on making more, but that's kind of, between working a full-time job and not being properly therapized or medicated until recently, that really put a dent in my productivity, and it's already started going faster. And I'm really excited, not to speed through the process, but not to be as slowed down by my own internal demons, my own floating skulls of flame.
I'm on a healthy dosage of Prozac myself. I don't know what you're on, but
that's one of them.
a few weeks ago, I tried to taper myself off. I don't have insurance right now, and I was like, oh my God, I can't afford it. And then somebody let me know that you can get generics from Walmart for $4. And I was like, oh my God, thank God. There was a week I was weaning myself off meds and I thought the entire world was going to melt down. And then back on them, I'm like, oh no, man, I can't even imagine. I would actually love to talk to you more about that, but I've already kept you for an hour. Cause that's one thing I really like is people now we're getting more and more open about just being on Prozac and Zoloft and all that stuff. So thank you for talking about it.
Yeah, of course. I would encourage anybody who is in the kind of constant pain that I was. Like, I was in such a bad spot, I didn't even realize how bad it was. You know what I mean? Like, until I look back and I'm like, oh, so much of that was unnecessary, like suffering that like my brain sort of tricked me into. So like, if you're in that same sort of situation, like definitely if you can afford it, if you've got the resources, seek out help. It's made a huge difference in pretty much all my family's lives. Both my parents, me, I have a small family. So
no, it's more and more common these days. And like I found now that I'm on a healthy doses of Prozac, like I read better, I write better, I'm more productive. I'm not fighting this urge to go this way. Oops, this urge to go that way. So it's actually like, I thought it was going to be something that like killed my creativity, but instead I found that I'm actually able to focus my creativity more. So, and it sounds like it's working that way for you too.
Same. Absolutely. Because the anxiety, and I wonder if that's what slows a lot of artists down, is because you can see what you want to do, but going through the actual process, which means making shitty drafts, and making bad choices and that have to be fixed later, or, just not knowing what you're doing and heading down blind alleys some days, like that. If you can get past that and just accept it as part of the process, I think that really is incredibly freeing, because nobody has to see it if you get to the end and say like, nope, I really screwed the pooch. But or you can go fix it, so that's I would recommend it to anybody who thinks it might help.
Yeah, and it's one of those. I was talking to a buddy of mine who's in AA. He's walking across America right now. He's in the middle of Texas or New Mexico, and he's like, dude, just one foot at a time, And I think for people who write, one sentence at a time, one question at a time. So it's been interesting, and that's one thing I want to try to talk more and more open about my own mental journeys. And so I appreciate that you are into it and talking to me about it today.
Of course. Well, thank you for having me. I mean, we can do this again. I'm still in quarantine, so
yeah.
If you want to do a part 2 or anything, I'm definitely open to that.
I actually think I might, because man, there's so much stuff. Like there's so much stuff. Do you have a favorite bookstore in the United States of America? Or a favorite couple?
Yeah, I think my favorite, and it's really because is in Mississippi. It's
Okay.
Lemuria Books. That was the second event I did for Cosmology, and they kind of pulled out all the stops. Like they were putting up ads with people dressed as wolves and stuff on, on their Instagram. And it was a, one of the biggest crowds I had. They have a separate building where they do the readings and everything. And it was, and then, the book came out in September, and then they invited me back at Christmas to do another signing, and I got to meet more readers and hang out. So I have every store that invited me was wonderful, but like that one, I guess, has an extra special place in my heart because
Cool.
of where it fell in the journey. And just, I got to do a really cool interview that day. And with Ellen Rogers Daniels, who's one of the people who runs the Mississippi Book Festival. So if you put a gun to my head, I'm going to say Lemuria, but there are very few bookstores I've ever been inside that I didn't fall in love with. So
Yeah.
Hurry Lights in Iowa City is also really great. I love that place. That place was a lifesaver when I was in the workshop. Like it's just a little beacon of happiness.
Well, I'm going to highly recommend this book, obviously, because I've just talked your ear off for a little over an hour about it. I'll see if we can post some links to those bookstores in the podcast description and the YouTube links below. And hopefully you can either buy it from those guys. It's not still in Target anymore, is it?
I think you could get it off their website, but it's not on the shelf anymore. They just had it for Halloween.
We want to support small businesses.
Yeah, get it from your local indie if you can.
Yeah, I got my copy from the Tatter cover here in Denver. And then bookshop.org is also a good resource for supporting indie locals. Anything else you want to talk about before I let you go?
I mean, I could talk to you all night. I'm having a lot of fun.
I know, me too. Like, oh man, I kind of like this living room setup.
I think you should keep it. I think it's working for you.
Well, cool, man.
I guess just thank you for having me, and let me know if you want to do it again.
I do want to do it again. And maybe I have this crazy idea of doing like a book club with the podcast where I get like 10 of my friends together to read a book. And maybe I can talk some of my friends into reading this, and maybe we can do like a Zoom meeting with you on it, and we can all talk about it, and they can do a Q&A thing. And I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've had this idea, but I've been trying to like get it going, but it's hard to like get it going. So maybe this is what we need to do it.
Well, I will come. I will come to your book club. I am available.
Online book. Well, maybe one day to Denver too. So, all right, man. Well, anything else?
No, that's it.
Yeah, that's cool for me too. Okay. All right, we'll cut it somewhere in there.
Okay.
Dude, thanks so much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had a great time. This is